Hi, and welcome back to our second part of our two-part series on leading and managing change. In this mini lecture, we really want to start to unpack how to manage change within organizations and how to manage resistance to change. Now, resistance to change is more common than you may think, so it's important to understand this as a manager. So, how do we manage change? Now, there are multiple theories on management of change. And in fact, Kurt Lewin was one of our founding fathers in this area, in which he said, you know what, there are three phases of change. There is the unfreezing phase, where we're preparing an organization to change, right? So we need to develop people ready for this condition. There's a changing phase, where we're implementing our change. So there's lots of changes in tasks, people, culture, technology, and structure. And then there's the refreezing phase. And the refreezing phase is where we stabilize what we've done in order to have a long-term continuity of that change itself. So here's Kurt Lewin's model. And you can see this in the textbook as well. But a change manager's task is to really unpack what this means to you in all three phases. All right, so in the first instance, our change manager needs to create a fit or a reason for change. So what's the fire? Why do people have to change right now? So there's a sense of urgency. And that sense of urgency is going to drive the unfreezing. So how do I stop people doing what they're already doing? Then my task is to implement the change, right? So I need to change people's behaviors. And I do that through doing a variety of activities, such as redoing the forms, implementing new processes, putting new staff on board, maybe making some staff redundant, depending on the level of change. But there are things I need to do. So tasks. So this is where I implement the change itself. And then after the change itself has been done, I need to refreeze that somehow. So I need to stabilize this. I need to reward. I need to make sure people are aware that this is actually where we're going in the future, and start to use our discipline tactics to get rid of some of our old behaviors. So there are lots of forces and strategies to manage change. Okay, so there's the force coercion strategy. And this strategy uses the power bases of legitimacy, rewards, and punishment as the main reasons for change. Okay, so these are our inducements for change. So back in our leading lecture, we talked about power and how everyone has a different source of power that they can use on others. So force coercion will say, okay, I'm your boss, therefore you have to follow what I ask you to do. I also have the capability of giving you rewards, but more importantly, I have the capable of punishing you. So I'm using my positional power in order to make this change happen. Now that may be you have to fill in this form. I'm not going to pay you until you fill in the right form, or it may be something more bigger than that. The other strategy is a rational persuasion strategy. So it's a softer strategy, in which case we're saying, look, I've looked at the figures and we need to reduce our output waste by 20%. And we're going to do it in this way. And this is why we're doing it. So it relies on this rational argument to come out and influence people's perceptions of urgency through this empirical data. The other strategy we can use is the shared power strategy. All right, so we can assess the values, needs, and goals of others. But the idea is that people participate in this change, and that's where we use consultation processes in place. So how do we choose what strategy to use? Now, we know that each strategy has different power bases, but how do we choose? Now, we choose based on the results. So if we're wanting a really quick result with temporary compliance, then of course we're going to use force coercion. I pay you, therefore you have to. It's just the simple nature of working in life. However, if I want a long-term change to actually happen, people to get on board with my change and actually embody that and really come on what I want them to do, then I use more of a shared power strategy. So I have a longer term to get this change happening, and it's so much slower than a force coercion strategy, but I have that time to be able to really engage with the workforce and, listen to what's happening to them and do some great stuff about that. So let's talk about the force coercion strategy a bit more. So we know that forced coercion strategy uses the positional power basis of legitimacy, rewards, and punishments, right? It directly forces people to action, all right? We can command them that they do it this way because that's the position that I'm in. We can politically maneuver to get special advantage over people and make them change also. Now, within organizations, we know that there's always politics. The level of politics and the depth of politics is part of that informal structure that we spoke about in our organizing lecture. But we need to understand the politics in order to use political maneuvering in order to get people done, what we want to be done. So the challenge is that if I'm using a forced coercion strategy, it's only ever going to be temporary. People are not going to continue doing this behavior when I leave or when I'm not looking. And that's really important. The other strategy you can use is that rational persuasion strategy. So we know that by using empirical data and really having a rational argument, that should change some people, right? Because the argument goes, people are inherently rational. If I say, look, it's really important that you wear a yellow hat today, and it's really important that you wear a yellow hat because yellow attracts the sun. We need the sunflowers to get more sun, and sunflowers attract honeybees, and we know that honey is going out of honeybees are going out of extinction. They're going to be extinct soon. So the more you can help, the better it is. It's going to be more influential and have more people on board. Now, it's not going to get everyone on board because not everyone follows a rational logic, but it will start to get people on board. All right. So people will eventually comply with a reasonable commitment, but it's not a guaranteed commitment at the end. The shared power strategy is this collaboration. All right, so we ask people for input. We have lots of consultation meetings. We change things. The idea is that they start to own this new strategy going forward or this new change. And it's part of who they are because they've inputted into it. All right, so the idea is that we're actually getting people on board of our bus in order to empower them to, jump on board. So we're trying to open that door, get them on the bus, through empowerment and participatory nature. All right. If we're using this strategy, it's going to stick. People are more likely to stay in this bus with us than using any other strategy, but it is very slow. All right. So that's how we do change. Now I want to move on to how we resist change. So how do we manage resistance? Now, resistance is seen quite often in organizations, and every change brings about it with some level of resistance, and it really depends on what's happening in people's lives, depends on how resisting to that change that they are. So people may resist change because they fear the unknown. It disrupts what they do on a day-to-day basis. They lose confidence in what they're already doing, and they may even lose a bit of control by having the new system in place. It may be just really bad timing. Right? There might be other things going on. So you in strategy may be trying to implement a new process for doing billing, for example. However, over in HR, they've just implemented a brand new strategy on hiring. So not only does a manager then have to implement a new hiring process, but also a new billing process. And then all of a sudden, they might have just changed locations. So there might be too much change happening. And it's really important to start listening to some of that feedback that we're getting. And there might also be a loss of face at some point. Quite often, employees will resist to change using silence. Now, this is the deadliest type of resistance that you can get. All right, so people don't fear, they don't speak up, you assume that they're on board because you don't hear anything else. Whereas in reality, they're not. And in fact, they're working against you in the background. All right, so it's really important that we encourage people to talk, people to let their emotions out, because organizational silence, while it's often interpreted as agreement, is one of the deadliest forms of resistance. It means that they're not on board, then they don't even feel like they're going to be heard in any way, shape, or form, so why bother? So that employee may actually build up a whole lot of resent, and that may result in a whole lot more people leaving than you would like to in the first place. So we can manage resistance in a number of ways. So we can actually start to discuss what's happening in a series of education and communication broadcasts. We could get their involvement through participation in consultancies or consultations. We could get them to facilitate and support people through this process through having a negotiator or a mediator or some sort of support worker on to handle all of those calls. We may certainly use manipulation and co-optation, or we may even have to use explicit and implicit coercion. All of these approaches are used within organizations today, and they're all legitimate approaches depending on the circumstance. Your job as a manager is to work out what is appropriate for you at that point in time. So, change happens. Your job as managers will be to work out how you're going to best manage change. Now, each strategy that you use is going to be different depending on the type of change, whether it's a planned or an unplanned, a large scale or a small scale, a transformational or just a normal everyday change, and depending on who you are working with. So if you're working with people that handle change really well and they're really quite flexible, then managing change for you is not going to be that much difficult. But if you're working with people that have been there for 50 years, they've done the same thing for 50 years, then you're going to get stuck. And you're going to have to use some nice and some not nice ways in which to get them on board. And that's something that you need to choose, but it's also one of those skill sets, if you can skill up on it, you're going to be miles ahead of all your competition in your area. So thank you for listening to this mini lecture on change.